On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Jason Luce. He is the CTO at Paperless Parts. We're going to be talking about the evolution to platform engineering. We're going to talk about where we've come from. That's the world of DevOps and why that's been, what's the differences between DevOps and platform engineering, the intentionality behind a shift and what that means for your team. We're also going to be talking about adopting what other bigger companies at scale operate at and handle at a smaller org. I think that's a really important one. Going to try to get as much as we can in here with Jason. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Amir. Great to be here. I'm excited about this topic.
Absolutely. Before we start, please tell everyone what Paperless Parts does.
Paperless Parts is quoting and estimating software for advanced manufacturers. So we are a SaaS platform designed to help manufacturers operate more effectively.
Awesome. All right. I like it. That seems like a great spot to be in. Lots of moving parts, lots of data. This topic, platform engineering, I've actually found it to be a really interesting one because as a recruiting agency owner, when people want platform engineering, it invariably gets sucked into the conversation of what is DevOps and what is platform to you, because people view this as a kind of a murky gray area. So let's start off at the top, because I think definitions are very helpful in this type of conversation. And it'd be great if you could define for us two different areas. One, what you consider DevOps, and then what is platform engineering, and we'll dive in from there.
Sure. And it is murky, and I think there's a lot of discussion around the differences here. To me, that's where this is interesting. I certainly think of DevOps as designed to drive the flexibility between operations infrastructure and software engineering teams. And I feel like that's where that really came out of, was a lot of the walls and friction that existed in operations and software teams trying to work together in the early 2000s. And I feel like DevOps really drove for that flexibility, shared ownership, shared accountability, a lot more transparency and shared responsibility of the tech that ran the underlying software. I view platform not as wholly different from DevOps, but as an evolution. And I really think platform builds on a lot of the core technical constructs that came out of DevOps, think about CI/CD, infrastructure as code, and a lot of those things are foundational to platform. To me, platform is about productizing and standardizing those systems, where I see DevOps is more about the flexibility and shared ownership of the systems.
And you know, something that as you were talking, and I actually asked the question of what DevOps is. I've spoken to a number of DevOps people over the years, and I've always been corrected by some, and the fact that it technically shouldn't be a job. It's a core set of principles. It's something that should be embodied, but shouldn't be a role. And you mentioned some of where it came from a legacy perspective, and it made me think about when Scrum was becoming a part of technology. Project managers filled that Scrum role, but that really was not what Scrum really was prescribing. When you think about DevOps, and obviously, we'll talk about this in relation to platform engineering, these principles, obviously they are formal jobs now, but is there a world where if we'd have looked at this differently, or maybe we are looking at it differently, and that's what platform engineering is trying to do, is to kind of move away from it being a formal job and kind of embodying that principles of DevOps across the org?
It's a great question, and I don't know that I would go so far to say that I think it eliminates kind of this middle role, although part of me would like to think that that is part of the opportunity. And I think that is an element of where I see platform, where I think so much of the DevOps culture, to hit on what you're touching on, not just like DevOps engineers, but the DevOps culture, I think a lot of that was designed to bridge knowledge gaps that existed. And so I think we created these constructs and the technology and roles to help bridge the gap. Certainly, I think if everything is going as we would want it, we wouldn't necessarily need roles in place to bridge two teams together. But I think that difference is very hard. So I think that's probably a long ways away. But I certainly look at platform as productizing the elements so the software engineers don't need to be experts in those areas that platform engineers, platform teams need to run. They do need to be deeply knowledgeable in those areas. So to me, that certainly is the hope, is those software teams have enough knowledge to use the systems effectively, know what they're dealing with, but without needing that translation layer in between.
Absolutely, and that makes perfect sense. I've had this discussion. I don't think the role is going away either. I think it's an interesting theoretical discussion of where those responsibilities lie. When you think of platform engineering, and you are looking at, let's say we have a team that is traditionally built with a layer of DevOps engineers, and they do want to move towards a platform engineer focused environment. Obviously, there's a lot of changes that the team's going to have to undergo, some cultural, some skill based. When you're looking at that gap and the reason to make that shift, maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there can be a gap, I think, depending on the skills. And I think to the point that you touched on, I think this is where there are a lot of terms around the skills and what goes into that. And I think about infrastructure and cloud engineering type of skills. But I think on a platform team, there definitely is more of an emphasis, I think, needed on an understanding of the underlying systems. And so I think that is where those roles have existed always in different companies. I don't know that all companies have necessarily hired for those roles. I think there are a lot of areas where I've seen companies hiring for this hybrid skill set that often gets described as DevOps engineering, that may focus on CI/CD and release and these other areas, where I think a platform, it is really owning and understanding deeply the underlying systems. And so I think that's where a lot of those foundational technical needs come out of. But it still includes owning those areas that have been traditional DevOps in terms of CI/CD pipelines, release management, and those elements. So that skill piece is critical. I think it's key to really understand what's needed to get to that platform engineering, which often is a deeper set of skills than some teams have. But I think that's also a big part of the opportunity. We certainly at Paperless, and kind of moving on this journey, we've had people who are naturally in these places. We've hired some people in with additional skills, and then we're also bringing people into this team as an opportunity for them to shift and expand their skills and their capabilities.
Interesting. And obviously, like, as we're talking, I realize that we can only generalize so much. There's always specifics. People have unique team topology and things that possibly are not able to be shifted. But as we're looking at, and you actually kind of dove into some of those changes, and as you're looking at, let's say, a company that is going through the life cycle of moving towards full CI/CD automation, and they're in that journey, does that type of company, do they want to start looking at platform engineering, or do they continue? And I guess this is kind of more of a situational question. A lot of factors we don't know, but I know a lot of companies are still going down that path and potentially down that maturity curve. Is that a case of, if there's a potential opportunity to pivot to a more efficient solution, do you do that? Or is it, hey, let's actually continue down this path because we've already invested X amount of time to get there?
Yeah, I think that's the big decision that's in front of companies in any of these journeys. And I never look at any of it dogmatically, so I would never say you should just go, but I think people should be thinking about it. And I think a lot of what that comes down to is being really honest about what's working well and what's not working well. And so I think there's an element of that, which is just measurement and understanding what you're measuring. And that in itself could be an entire podcast to talk about engineering measurements and the things we would want to cover. But I think really looking at those things, and whether that's speed of what you're executing, quality of the system, one of those I would encourage everyone to really think about is developer experience as well. Is not just how fast can you get changes through, not what your failure rate is, and all these other things that are really important, but also what that developer experience is. And I think that's one of the elements to me that has really been an anchor of the platform engineering movement, is understanding in a lot of companies the DevOps culture really has created a lot of cognitive load on the software engineering teams that are building features. And they now are required to not only work with product teams and think about customers and value and build products, they also are having to think about all the details of how they implement that on their infrastructure and how it runs and how they operate that. in a lot of areas, what I've seen, and when we look at some of the other companies, talk about like Spotify and Netflix, and what they focused on was so heavy in DevX and really saying, you know what, at the end of the day, one, the consistency of this system isn't great, and our software engineers in a lot of places don't really feel like they're being super effective and aren't super happy. So if I looked at a company and said, if you're nailing all those metrics, all of your software engineers are super happy, they feel like they're being super effective, you're nailing your quality and consistency, and your security is ideal, then great. Then you've probably got it figured out, and maybe don't break something. But certainly the people I've talked to across a lot of companies is I think most companies feel like there's a lot of space for a number of those areas to improve. And in those areas, I think it's worth people thinking a bit differently and not necessarily just anchoring in the thing that they think they've always been doing.
I guess as you're kind of looking at the developer experience, I guess maybe talk to us a little bit more. Have you seen, I guess, measurements before and after platform engineering come in to be able to determine how that's impacted the developer experience? Is that something that you've been able to track or see?
We are actively tracking it. I think we're too early to tell. We started on this journey a little over a year ago for us, of being really deliberate, of stating that this platform engineering journey is something that we're on. And so we've gone through 2 cycles of measuring developer experience within the team. And so I would say, I think from a sense of where I think we're going and the feedback from the team and the focus of the team, I feel really positive about where we're going. Far too early to declare that we've really solved anything yet and that we've gotten over that. But I think we've seen great signals. And really what the DevX surveys have allowed us to focus on is just capturing from developers, what are the things that make it harder for them to do their jobs? And I think just establishing across the team that that's fundamentally important has already created a really positive morale shift. And I think with a platform engineering team declaring that their job is in part to help solve that. If those challenges are things that they own, of releasing code and understanding their code and understanding what's working and not working and all of those things, having a team own that and say, yes, doing that better and making all of you more effective is in fact our job, and that's the product we're building. I think it's created an incredibly positive cultural element. The early signs we're seeing are positive. We can catch up in another year and we'll have a couple more goes at this, and I can tell you how it's looking, but I feel really optimistic about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be really interesting to come back, track this after a year and maybe even a second year and just kind of see, because I think a lot of times, the shift in these type of things are not captured, and obviously in hindsight people have different views of it. Being a year into it, out of curiosity, when it comes to your team, what are some of the changes they've had to undergo, and not just from a skills perspective, just from a culture perspective? Are there changes that they've experienced in this last year?
From a culture perspective, I think there is, I think both a lot of positivity, and I think the team feeling like some of these areas that, in a small company, we're a small team. So I think there are a number of areas where you're often having to figure things out, and it's often collaborative across a group of people. And so I think we've definitely seen a lot of really good positive cultural view on taking ownership of some of those challenges and laying out a roadmap. And so we have a 3-year roadmap of what this platform engineering journey looks like, the things that we're providing to teams. So I think that's really helped a lot with people feeling like the things we know we need to build or improve upon now have ownership and clarity. And I think that's been great. I think one of the things that's been challenging, although I think very positive for us overall on our growth journey as a company, is understanding that we have taken away a degree of the just go figure it out as an engineer and just go stand something up in production and just go get something running. And so I think in a way we have taken that away. I think we're too big now. I mean, we're a small company, but I don't know that I'd call us a startup anymore. And so the mode of someone just go spin up some infrastructure and just get that thing running is no longer the best thing for our customers or our business. And so I think we've been going through that evolution of we're no longer a 0 to 1 company. And so getting people's mindset shifted that in some ways say, yes, we're going a little slower in some ways, but that little slower is a little slower now, but with the ability to really maintain and execute all of this really well in the years to come. I think there's the big gain that. So it's the right path, and I think everyone knows it's the right path, but that's always a hard adjustment when you start taking back a little of the control from some members of the team.
Absolutely. Yeah, you touched on obviously referring to bigger, larger scale companies, and obviously reference to some of the way they do business within their engineering team. When it comes to looking at larger companies, companies that are at scale, and looking at adopting some of what they are doing, I guess, what is your experience? What have you seen work? Is that something people should be looking at as an example? It's okay that they're bigger, but we can scale it down.
That's one of the conversations we've had a lot internally and with some of my other peers in the industry, is looking at, and some of the best examples are Netflix, Airbnb, Spotify, Amazon to a degree, that all have written a lot in their engineering blogs and other articles, lots of great writing about kind of their shift. And a lot of what the two big things they'll focus on in why they shifted were, one, cognitive load. So that was a big one. Spotify really focused on just that sense of their software engineers had to spend far too much time doing too many disparate things, just too much load. They were unhappy and not as productive. And I think also a sense of consistency and inconsistency in what they're building. And that could be in quality, in the way underlying systems were being used, and how observability was implemented, and how security controls were maintained. And I think that, Airbnb and Netflix really hit on these things. And so there's always an interesting thing, particularly as a small company, where I always try to be careful to say, hey, just because one of these big tech companies is doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It's a very different situation. And they all spoke to the fact that a lot of that shift for them came out of the size of the team and these inconsistencies and inefficiencies just hitting a wall. But when I've really thought about it, I think the thing that I've reflected on is that they noticed the pain of some of these inefficiencies just at scale, because that pain became so big they couldn't ignore it. To me, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist when you're small. So I think those same inefficiencies, and the inefficiency I'm talking about, having engineers having to own multiple things and having to implement observability and security in the right ways all the time, those things exist at a small scale. So I think it's really important to not say it's the right thing to do because these big tech companies are doing it. But I think it's also naive to say, well, we're not there yet, therefore those systems don't apply to us. I think this is where I would suggest everyone really look at what's working for them and what's not. And if the pain you're already seeing at a small scale reflects that, then some of the learnings probably apply.
I like the mindset, because I think, I think it's always easy to look at somebody at scale, big business, and wonder if you can adopt. I think it's very challenging to have the right resources and the timeline. I mean, those are all, some of the challenges. When you've been going down this path, and obviously a year ago you guys made a decision, what was the tipping point to go, this is a path we need to explore for you? What did you see that you thought, as an organization, this is the right directional change?
Yeah, when I joined the company, I think some of what I saw were, classic small company DevOps approaches to things, which I think there were a number of things that were doing well. It was highly collaborative between a small team that was labeled as the DevOps team and the software engineers. But I think definitely what I saw was an inconsistency in how we were implementing things. We would have a clear understanding of best practices or where we wanted to go. But because there was a lot of flexibility for teams to use the systems they were being given, they weren't always being used consistently. A big thing for us that also drove it is security. We work in a space where we are in a compliance landscape. It's about half of our customers do work that's related to defense-related companies. And so we are FedRAMP moderate, so we have to deal with a bunch of compliance and security. So it's a big part of what we focus on. So that's also another element that's really looking at how we execute that consistently. So I think the need was there, and a lot of the telltale ways of seeing how the DevOps work had some great elements to it, but some real challenges. And I think, frankly, coming back to a little bit to the prior question, given our size and how small we were, we actually had an opportunity to make this shift without disrupting something large scale. So the sense of moving to platforms, when you're small, it's actually far simpler. These big companies that made the shift, that's multiple years and a massive investment for us. it's a relatively small team of people. So I felt like there was enough green space there for us to do this where we weren't so entrenched in a way of working that when we started talking to the team about it, it really resonated with people as far as the gains we could get out of it. And it felt like a ripe opportunity. So so I jumped on it and felt like we had the advantage of being really ready to take it on.
Absolutely. I mean, makes sense. And, if you were to reflect back over the year, and I guess this might be targeted for people that are maybe in the midst of moving to platform engineering or thinking about it, but are there any things that in hindsight, obviously learnings, best practices that you're like, if you're going to make this transition, things to consider?
Yeah, I think one is really owning it and being clear with the declaration and the space between where you want to go with a vision and where you are in the moment. Like anything, but I think like a good product. I think what I've heard from some peers in the industry is that sometimes people want to lean into this, but they don't want to overstate it. And I think sometimes run into the problem of actually approaching it with the team as though they're just making a few small changes. And I think it's really hard to drive change when you spend too much time trying to convince people you're not really changing out of this fear that they're going to be disrupted or that they won't go along with it. So we certainly got very clear on defining a vision around it, defining a roadmap and kind of a 1, 2, and 3 year view of where we were going with this and where this would take it. So people could anchor in that vision. But then we also got really clear on where we are today and what we can reasonably accomplish. So to me, that's one of the biggest things. Just that kind of clarity, just like you would with a product with the business. Have a vision of where you're going, get people inspired around it, and then be really honest about where you are and set realistic expectations. I think the other part is assessing the team and the skills and the readiness and recognizing that you may need some additional skills. You may not. You may have opportunities to fill some of those internally. But it's a shift that, while subtle in certain ways, I think is deep enough that I think for any tech leadership, it's really important to make sure with that vision and plan for where you're going that you really focus on having those skills in place and anchor around that right from the start. Otherwise, I think people will find themselves just swimming upstream for a long time and not really able to turn the corner if they don't clearly establish that some new skills might be needed.
Interesting. I think those are some fantastic pieces of advice. I guess, final question maybe, we've talked about the end state of where you'd like to go. Obviously we haven't talked about, but what is the end state of what are you hoping to achieve? I guess as this move to platform engineering is a year in, and we'll kind of check back and see how you're doing. But what is the ultimate goal? Where would you like to see the project end, or where is it? Do you feel that there'd be a end point to this particular part of the journey?
I think for this part of the journey, I think it'll be a continuous evolution like anything else. But I think for this part of the journey is having kind of the core, what we're describing as the products in place that essentially anything that we'll be building in, say, the next 3+ years, that software engineering teams are able to just start up very quickly, build those things, and know they can build, deploy, have those operate at scale, have them be secured, have them have kind of observability built in at its core. They can grow as the business grows. And the software engineering teams don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And so that requires that we're continuing to build in and really productize different elements of what we're doing. So they're foundational pieces, starting around containerization and the way we handle authentication between our systems, but really building that up so that the capabilities, and that includes, incorporating AI into our product and being able to build the structure around that so teams can just go use it. They don't need to start from scratch and say, oh, well, how do I do this in the cloud? And what are the tools that I should use? And how are we securing the data that we're using for our training and modeling? But really being able to, they're great, we want to go build a thing. They look to the platform team and there is a ready-made framework in place and the tools available that teams can just operate. So that's really the goal, is that we get to a point where we can operate with that kind of speed and quality.
Awesome. I love the topic. I'm glad we were able to cover it. I know there's other aspects that we did not cover. We did not exhaust it for sure. If somebody does want to touch base with you, Jason, to kind of ask you about the journey, things you've learned, is there a good way of connecting with you to maybe do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect. I'm Jason Luce on LinkedIn. I'm CTO of Paperless Parts. You can find me there. You can look at our website. You can reach out through us. But LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch. Yeah, I love connecting with people, networking, and this is a fascinating topic. So happy to have people reach out. Would love to talk with people and certainly learn more. I'm sharing a lot here, but I'm spending a lot of time talking with others and learning, and would love to have further conversations.
Absolutely. Jason, thanks for being on the show. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. But until then, two things. One, I thought this is a great topic. I think when Jason mentioned this is a topic he's passionate about talking and covering on the episode, I thought it was great. I hadn't covered it before. And I think Jason provides some great insights, advice, best practices, his views on how his team's handling this shift to a more of a platform engineering focused team. Please share this with somebody else who might benefit. I thought it was great. And also like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you in general. Otherwise, thank you and goodbye.